Look at all that money, yeah, the money that they spend. Take another look now and take some time for hemp. Don't cut trees for paper, cause it hurts the environment. Stop deforestation, yeah, it's time for hemp. Oh, an acre of hemp makes 20 barrels of oil. No need for pesticides to poison all our soil. People got no food, they got no clothes, they got no rest. Well, right now it's time for hemp.
Thank you for taking Time for Hemp. I'm your host, Casper Leitch. You are listening to Time for Hemp all around the world at timeforhemp.com, Tumblr, SoundCloud, and, of course, iHeartRadio. We are the only 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week, all cannabis broadcasting network on iHeartRadio. And like a good joint, we are best when shared with friends. It is Wednesday, and Wednesday we like to put a spotlight on the amazing organization Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. I would encourage you to go to leap.cc and find a speaker to help bring to your world, to help introduce the community about the need to end prohibition. With that said, don't forget that anytime the word joint is mentioned on the Big Joint broadcast, nearly 2.5 million people all around the world pack their bongs or pipes or vaporizers and wrap up a joint and take time for hemp. With that said, I'm going to pass this conversation over to our joint host today so we can have a nice joint chat with our joint friend here on the Big Joint broadcast. And while you're out there enjoying your joints and I'm enjoying my joint, we're going to let Judge Leonard Frieling have a nice conversation with our returning friend, Richard Newton, here at Time for Hemp. Your Honor?
Richard, good morning. Casper, as always, a pleasure. I am sad to say that because we have reels rolling, electrons clicking, I am not going to interrupt our process and our pleasure to go downstairs and get a vape pen. So I'll just have to manage for an hour. And one of the things about hemp, marijuana, which is so fascinating is, unlike some other decidedly more dangerous drugs, which we still need to legalize and regulate, I don't particularly miss not having it for the next hour. I don't go through withdrawal symptoms, so it presents an easier question. But we cannot let the easy question divert our energy, divert our focus from the big picture, from what LEAP is really about. And Richard, as a LEAP speaker, I'm going to jump right in. Richard, your previous law enforcement experience as a LEO, a law enforcement officer, was in Florida flying for U.S. Customs doing Gulf and Caribbean drug interdiction. Am I on the right track?
Yeah, basically stuff right out of Miami Vice. And it was the same time frame as Miami Vice TV shows when cocaine was literally falling out of the sky and washing up on the beaches. So.
I knew the Fontainebleau was expensive for a reason. On a more concrete level, we throw these terms around. Airplane drug interdiction over the Caribbean and Mexico and Gulf of Mexico. What does that really mean? What am I really saying? What are you really doing out there? What were you doing out there?
Depending on the radar target, we would launch either helicopters or jets and helicopters, go out and identify the target, hopefully without the target knowing what we were doing. And if the signs indicated that it was a probable smuggler, we would follow him until he landed and then search his aircraft. And depending, sometimes they had drugs, sometimes they didn't. You know, it just depended on the profile of the aircraft, the M number or the registration. And sometimes we would catch pretty good loads. I caught 1,000 keys of cocaine one time in Puerto Rico because it was coming in on a go-fast boat, and it was only Puerto Rico was only 400 miles from Colombia. And that's about when I actually started thinking about this, because we caught 1,000 kilos of coke, 2,200 pounds. Street value was about $100 million. Didn't affect the price of cocaine by 1 or 2 cents that we could tell from our intelligence reports in San Juan. So what the use of this was, why we were doing this, I wasn't quite sure, other than as window dressing.
What I'm thinking is that if, for example, we looked at Apple, Macintosh, when Steve Jobs was removed from the picture, there was not, in my opinion, there was not a person to jump in, fill his seat, fill his chair, take over the job, and things proceeded ahead with no change. A normal business model. Somebody quits, you hire somebody else. Let me ask you this. In the drug field, if our law enforcement officers, if our airplane interdiction efforts result in taking somebody, a big smuggler, out of the business, did that job then get eliminated?
Oh, of course not. Somebody else stepped up to make the money. $550 billion a year worldwide. There's got to be people there to take the money.
Where do I get an application?
And there's an expression in law enforcement, and it applies to politics as well, but it's follow the money. And, of course, if you do that, then you start realizing why some people are against legalization and why some people are really against legalization. It affects jobs, livelihoods, whole industries. But it also, at the same time, would spawn new jobs, new livelihoods, and new industries.
Now, you two know exactly precisely where I'm going with this when I point out that if law enforcement takes out, eliminates, however we do it, we fire them, we imprison them, we kill them, whatever we do, and take out one of the kingpins, for lack of a better word, there is no question in any of our minds that that job is then immediately filled. And based upon that model, is it fair to say that taking the leap to prohibition, and this is all part of prohibition, trying to prohibit this behavior, do we make a dent in it with our present policy?
No, I don't think so. Again, all the interdiction, all the money that the U.S. spends on its border, we consume more drugs per capita than any other country on earth. We cannot keep drugs out of state prisons, much less the country. And, the bottom line is somebody's going to step up. As soon as you arrest somebody else is going to step up and take the job because there is so much money involved. And the only reason there's so much money involved is because the stuff is illegal. It doesn't cost any more to grow marijuana than it does tobacco.
I have learned, for years I had been using coffee as a comparison because my understanding is they grow in similar climates. What I have learned is that for one coffee crop, you get 2 coca crops for making cocaine. So agriculturally, it has advantages over coffee for the farmer.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
We talk about the militarization of the war on drugs. And obviously, I'm bringing that up because you're here talking about jets. You're talking about helicopters. Are we talking about little, I say little because we do live near Aspen, little personal jets, military jets, little helicopters that we use to shuttle across Boulder from one high-tech plant to another of the same company? What kind of equipment are we talking about when you say jets and helicopters?
Well, Customs does have a fleet of Citation jets, which are small business jets outfitted with special radar and infrared. And they also have small helicopters, but I flew a Black Hawk, which is, current state-of-the-art Army troop transport that would carry 15 people. Customs also flies P-3s, which are the U.S. Navy uses for submarine patrols. We put an AWACS dome on it. We can see 150 miles in any direction looking for targets. So that's the kind of... Customs is not flying small, single-engine aircraft. They actually have a fairly sophisticated fleet. And, of course, it costs a lot of money to run. And like on the AWACS, the P-3s, we do a lot of stuff in South America because it's not American military. Doing interdictions, because the countries down there are fairly sensitive to Yankee imperialism. So instead, we go down there with Customs, which is in a law enforcement role, and quite happy to see us. But again, it's not small stuff. Those P-3s are big 4-engine turboprop aircraft used at one time as an airliner.
4-engine turboprops? You mean like the ones that we need in the Rocky Mountains for firefighting are tied up down looking for
yeah,
drugs?
actually P-3s are used. It's a Lockheed aircraft. Customs got them from the U.S. Navy, which used them for anti-submarine patrols. And I guess they are now used as fire bombers, some of the older ones. They're the size of a C-130. So.
Oh, and I'm saying it that way because those of us that follow aircraft know that a C-130 is big. It's big. And anytime we're talking about 4 engines, turboprop or other prop, we're talking really large planes. When we're talking planes that can be used for firefighting, of course, we're talking about planes that can travel low, slow, and carry huge amounts of fire retardant. So let's switch to the Blackhawks. We all know, and aside from, hopefully, our distaste for war, in terms of boys and their toys, the Black Hawk is about as cool as it gets, other than the fact that it's designed to kill large numbers of people and take out enemy aircraft and the like. Here's where I'm going with the question. When you were using Black Hawks, which we all know from the movies that at least I know and watch and love, are they armed? Are they loaded?
Actually, no, they're not. But we have 2 to 4 agents in back with machine guns or shotguns as appropriate. The Black Hawk is used primarily in the Army as a troop transport. I think you might have it confused with an Apache. But the Black Hawks are used for troop and medevac. And Customs uses them because they're fast and they can keep up with small airplanes that are used to smuggle loads of coke or whatever.
So the Blackhawks you're talking about are primarily for looking, watching, gathering information.
Also doing arrests because, like I said, they're fast enough to follow a small airplane. And the ideal tactic is the Citation jet is following the airplane at 5 or 6 miles with radar, and we're following the Citation, and then the bad guy lands, and we land right in front of him. And airplanes don't have a reverse, so basically they're trapped when we do that. That's the ideal scenario. But of course, Customs and Border Patrol now, CBP, use the Blackhawks for everything from Border Patrol activities to drug interdiction to search and rescue, actually. I mean, I was down at Katrina shortly after it happened, flying Blackhawks. We used Blackhawks out in the Arizona desert to rescue immigrants that try and cross that desert in July when it's 120 degrees. So, like I said, I think prohibition and no drug law is kind of silly, but they do get used for other purposes. So I'm not just going to paint a one use only of these aircraft. But the whole, again, customs catches 8 to 10%, 8 to 13% of the drugs that cross into the U.S., so we're not keeping them out no matter how sophisticated the military toys we use.
Let's repeat that. What I am hearing, and I'm hearing it because I know you said it, and I'm using that as an excuse to repeat it. What I am hearing is that using our unbelievably sophisticated tools, used by people that I believe have substantial training, and focusing this time and energy not on the Katrina stuff, which we would all look at and say, that is a good use of resources. I'm glad we have them. When we use it for drug interdiction, when we use it to enable prohibition, I'm asking you a question you already answered, but the answer is so important. How are we doing? What percentage of the drugs do we think we are keeping out of the country?
Well, Customs has said 8 to 13%. If you take an average of about 10%, so the math is easy and all you have to do is move a decimal point. We've seen in the newspaper that we caught 500 pounds of cocaine. That means 4,500 pounds of cocaine came through. And you can apply that to any other drug you want to sell. Because, again, the reason I live in El Paso, Texas. Across the river, 50 yards away, is Ciudad Juarez, which for 3 or 4 years was the most dangerous city on earth. And the reason it was the most dangerous city on earth is the cartels were fighting and killing each other to be able to figure out who was going to sell us the drugs. Not for our health reasons or anything else, but so that they could make money. So, that's just human behavior.
Let's put some pieces together here. With our sophisticated drug interdiction, with our stopping, give or take 10%, do you see that, have you seen that, as having an impact on the street price of drugs?
Well, no, like I told you, I caught a load one time in Puerto Rico of 2,200 pounds of pure cocaine. Didn't affect the street price in San Juan, as far as we could tell with our intelligence agencies, by 2 or 3 cents. So, 2,200 pounds of pure cocaine doesn't affect the street price when you seize it. So that tells you how much is coming through. Plus, honestly, I suspect that the drug cartels figure that 10% of what they're smuggling being caught is just the cost of doing business.
We have no reason to think that they're clueless as far as running a business goes. They haven't suggested that to us. So,
no, go ahead.
The prohibition is not stopping the flow. In my wording, I would suggest, and I think you suggested this earlier, that in fact, with this government interdiction, what in fact is happening is the government is helping to maintain the high price.
I think that if you look at Colorado, just in the cases of marijuana, or the states that have legalized marijuana, I think that's exactly true.
Interesting. Yes, go ahead, please.
No, I've read some reports down here on the border that the states that are legalizing it have affected the cartels, making the cartels less profitable. But so far, it's four states in D.C. out of, 50? So
What I have read is that even with the 34 states now that have some type of change, whether it's decrim, which is not an end game, decriminalization, making it a civil offense as opposed to just legal and regulated. 34 states, including decrim, medical, recreational, I read that the wholesale price of marijuana coming across the border from the south, from our neighbors to the south, has dropped to less than half of what it had been. So, doing the opposite of prohibition, doing the opposite, legalize and regulate, we are having an impact. We are cutting the wholesale price. We are cutting the dollars going into the cartel pockets. So we are seeing that impact. How long have you been with LEAP?
4 or 5 years, somewhere in there.
And LEAP, of course, I refer to Law Enforcement Against Prohibition.cc, composed of people like you, former law enforcement officers, current law enforcement officers, current and former prosecutors, current and yours truly former judges, people that have been in law enforcement who had either already seen the light or, after years in the field, realized that prohibition was ineffective, counterproductive, deadly for some, and not an effective strategy. Is that a fair summary of the path many of us have taken to LEAP?
Yeah, I think exactly that. I mean, we've been doing this since 1970. Hasn't affected what I can see, drug usage. The percentages of people that use it are still pretty much the same. All it's really done is drugs are, cheaper, pure, more available now than they were in 1970. And the only other thing it's done is given us an incredible prison population. We have 5% of the world's people and 25% of the prison population. So,
as you may well be aware, and as I am sadly able to keep reminding people, the state of Colorado, the free state of Colorado with legalized recreational marijuana, still has the largest prison colony on the planet in Fremont County. We're home to Supermax. Ted Kaczynski, the super bomber, is a long-term Colorado tourist visitor now. Not only do we have federal Supermax, but in Fremont County we have a significant number of state prisons, different levels of security. We have private prisons, and the short version is we have gone from the highest imprisonment rate per capita, meaning the highest percentage of our population was in prison compared to Russia, compared to China. We had a higher percentage in prison than either. Well, we now have the dubious distinction of not only being the highest per capita, we simply have the most number of people in prison than we have more people in prison than any other country on the planet. Just sheer numbers. Land of the free and the home of the imprisoned. And let me remind you and our listeners of one other thing. We are fond of talking about the failure of the Nancy Reagan Just Say No, of the Richard Nixon war on drugs, cranking up by Nixon in about 1970. And let's keep in mind, what Nixon did, what the late President Nixon did for us is he merely coined a term, war on drugs. He didn't start prohibition. We have to go back to 1918, 1937, and our friends Anslinger and our friends William Randolph Hearst for the economic and power-driven origins of our current stage of prohibition.
Well,
and
speaking of the economic and power-driven portions of our prohibition, that's exactly what motivates us here on the big broadcast to take our commercial breaks. We have our own economic distresses as well, and we're going to take care of them. And then we're going to listen to a song about how fantastic marijuana is, and then we're going to come back and pick up where we left off here at Time for Hemp.
Listening to the Time for Hemp Global Broadcasting Network. The only broadcasting network dedicated to ending the global war on drugs on iHeartRadio.
THCF Medical Clinics are the premier physicians clinic in the United States. THCF has offices all across the United States from Hawaii to Michigan. THCF Medical Clinics has helped approximately 150,000 patients obtain their medical marijuana permits to legally possess, grow, and use medical marijuana. If you have chronic pain, multiple sclerosis, or any other neurological degenerative disease, or if you have any gastrointestinal disorders such as GERD, irritable bowel syndrome, or if you have AIDS, cancer, spastic disorders, seizure disorders, or glaucoma, call us at 1-800-723-0188 or visit us online at hemp.org. Again, the number is 1-800-723-0188 and the site is hemp.org.
Speaking for the legalization of marijuana. Awo, 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 awa, awa, sata ama sagana la la Gabriel alam, madani alam. Me chant, me chant, me chant, me chant. Oh, says I fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. No, me no fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. Take a look in Genesis and me say book number 1. Can make the herb seed for the human. It start way back on from creation. That was the time when the weed come from. So can make the herb give it on to Adam. That man they lose, that's how make it find Abraham. Old man Moses climb on Zion. How will they find the seed in the grave of Solomon? Fireman know it is a weed of wisdom. Some communion for inspiration. I know they want to take me chalice out of me and them fight against long time tradition. Babylon is a man with wicked intention. All Babylon they mean a malfunction. A Rasta man is a conscious man. Plant a seed and start a weed revolution, man. Oh, says I fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. No, me no fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. They find the cure for cancer in a Babylon. And if you sick and you don't fit, you want to link the chalwa. Gabriel alamla, sata amasagana. Peace and love, give thanks and praise before you burn the ganja. That is the blessing from Almighty Jaja. And who bring the message, the liquor rocker. Me born and me grow as a New Yorker. But when me go round the world, they say me from America. Look in me left pocket, find a bag of ganja. Look in the same pocket and find me lighter. Look in the next pocket, $1 and a quarter. Bring me a orange juice, I'm too high for liquor. But you make got the boom type of sense in me. And if you have a little hash and mix it together, you pass me the herb and the Dutch master. I wake up on the sense in me up on the street corner. So oh, says I feel Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. No, me no fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. Me talking some roots rock and reality. And up on the mic now the one rockety. Me born and me grow in a New York City. Me come fit teach the people love and unity. It's every type of man them we smoke sense. The young and the middle and the elderly. The rich man and the man we living in a poverty. Some them are belly full and some them are hungry. So when we get together in our community, we take a one jar, feed all our family, and pass it round this life for 1, 2, 3 degrees. I know you got to bless that. You want it done properly. The healing of the nation, certainly. You like it and you pass it and you feel high. Some them a follow me, some them a disagree. Nobody could ever take away my sensity. Oh, says I fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. No, we no fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. Oh, says I fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. No, we no fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. Awo, awo, awa, awa. It's gabidi masagan, sata amasagan, ala amlak, madani halam, me chant. Oh, says I fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. No, we no fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. Come on, oh, says I fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. No, we no fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. Come on, oh, says I fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. No, we no fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. Come on, oh, says I fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man.
Smoke it up, yo.
You were listening to True Ganja, and that's exactly what I smoke every day when I start my day. I like to do that while I'm busy in front of my computer trying to end prohibition. I would encourage you to be part of the solution. Stop being part of the problem. And just sitting there on the couch, eating your Twinkies and watching Jerry Seinfeld reruns is not part of the solution. Getting out that front door and talking to people and getting involved in organizations and activities is. With that said, I pass this conversation back to my joint host. They were having a great joint chat that we had to interrupt to bring you our joint ads from our joint sponsors. But we are now jointly done with our joint activities, and I'm going to smoke my joint here at Time for Hemp.
I couldn't agree more that it is important to pay the bills. After all, we are not communists.
Yeah.
We're capitalists. We believe that money has a proper moral, ethical place in a functioning society. It also is sadly quite prone to abuse, misuse, danger. But the same is true of many things. If they're used properly, they're blessings. If they're used improperly, they're horror show. And money in general, getting off topic, seems to be in that category. Sadly, you suggested it, and I must have misunderstood. You suggested that Jerry Seinfeld is not part of the solution. That's terrible news. I am convinced that any show that can have 5 stand-up comedians on one show and work must be part of a solution that I'm in favor of.
Well, maybe the solution of unemployment, but those who are just sitting there watching him hour after hour after hour, they are doing nothing productive.
Well, that's a fact, and as we all know, that while there are stoners, people that smoke a lot of pot and watch Captain Kangaroo and smoke cigarettes all day.
Right.
I contend that those same people would be doing the same thing with or without marijuana, and that what we don't talk about nearly enough are those of us that refer to wake and bake, those of us that find ourselves wearing down, calling it a day, take a toke, imbibe some of this miracle plant, and then find ourselves re-energized and back at work, and read the work the next day and say, that's good work. Unlike, say, alcohol, where your brilliant conversation one day, if you got to play it back the next day, might well find it just wasn't that brilliant. And as I'm fond of saying, although smoking pot does not make people stupid, some stupid people do smoke pot.
That's true. That's true. Well, let's get back to our joint chat with our joint guest.
Mr. Newton, how long were you with you were working with Coast Guard?
No, U.S. Customs.
U.S. Customs, I'm sorry. How long were you with Customs?
22 years.
I mean, that's a career.
Oh, yeah, it was a great job. They gave me a badge, a gun, a get-out-of-jail-free card, and I worked everywhere between Puerto Rico and Canada and through some of Central America. It's a great job.
And you're a pilot?
Yes.
And my understanding, my impression is pilots love to fly. If somebody gives them an airplane, there's nothing they want better, more than, let me fly it. And this would fit right into that. So,
it's better than working for a living.
Well, exactly. You have 22 years at the yoke. You have your badge gun, get out of jail free card. You're flying over a good part of our hemisphere. So what's the problem? Why would one leave that?
Well, I left it because a friend of mine was killed in a helicopter crash looking for illegal immigrants, which to me is even stupider than looking for drugs. But I would have had to leave a year and a half later anyway because of a mandatory retirement age at 57. But honestly, I still think drugs can damage society, but I think prohibition causes much more damage than any drug you can take. So instead of treating this as a law enforcement issue, I think it needs to be treated as a mental health issue. Honestly, if I'm here in Texas, if they legalized all this stuff tomorrow, like Colorado does, I'd walk right past it. I used marijuana once in 1971. That's it. And I think there are other people like that. But I also think the government shouldn't have the right to tell you what to put in and not put in your body. If you're not harming anybody else by your behavior, that's the libertarian streak, I guess.
What I think I'm seeing in Colorado, I think I am seeing the same people smoking now, vaporizing now, as were vaporizing and smoking before we legalized. What I am not seeing are people lined up outside of the Walmart dispensary waiting for something to go on sale to try something new. I am not seeing that. I am seeing reduced underage usage. And for clarity, and this is of course a leading question, we know the answer, is the leap position that these various drugs, whether they're the dangerous ones, the non-dangerous ones, or the who knows if they're dangerous or not category, is the leap position that people should use these drugs?
No, it's not. Again, all we're saying is that prohibition and the side effects of prohibition have much more damage to society than the drugs themselves. Whether it's marijuana or, quote, the dangerous ones. And I'm not sure that the dangerous ones are as dangerous as the government says, because other people I've read says, at one point in time we were told if you try crack one time, you're going to be addicted for the rest of your life. Well, we know that's bogus. So some of the other stuff the government has said, I have a little faith in the truthfulness of it. Again, though, with prohibition, what have you got? You've got the militarization of police, which, goes over into some of the stuff like what's going on in Baltimore, because all the drug laws let's face it, have a racial component to them. I just found out that the first marijuana law ever passed in the nation was passed where I live in El Paso, Texas. And I would say it's to keep the Mexicans under control. Prohibition of alcohol in the 20s was to keep the Jews, the Catholics, and the Germans under control. Crack cocaine laws, well, anyway, you got me started on racial stuff, but there's a component there that that a lot of the prohibitionists don't like to talk about. And you can make an argument as to how much of the drug law was passed because of racial components. I'm not going to, that's depending on what research or who you read. But there's definitely a component of control in these drug laws of various segments of our society. So, again, let's get rid of prohibition. If somebody smokes too much dope, or maybe not so much dope, but crack or other heavier drugs, and they have a problem, well, that's a mental health issue or a health issue. Not throw them in jail until they can't do anything,
And the racial impact, I am thinking that whether or not that is an intended consequence, whether or not the Anslingers, the Nixons, and the rest of the prohibitionist crew, whether or not they intend a racial impact, whether or not they intend to destroy neighborhoods of less wealth and more color, it doesn't really matter. What matters is whether or not that, in fact, is what is happening as a result of the war on drugs. And I believe all three of us would say in the Latin, well, duh, we know it is. Does the intent matter? No.
Well, exactly. So just look at the number, your chance of going to jail if you're black or Hispanic for smoking marijuana versus if you're a white guy. I think it's 5 to 7 times as great, assuming you're both arrested with the same amount of dope.
And does that affect the individual? Does that affect the neighborhood? Does that affect the family, the parents, the children, the election booth? Rhetorical questions for sure, but I think you and I are on the same page in saying we are destroying. First, we kidnap a whole bunch of people from Africa to bring them over as slaves. Then we make them slaves to the economy after we supposedly free them with 40 acres and a mule. The mule, it turns out, has an ironic double meaning, with us now using poor people from below the Texas border, and I'm sure from above, as our modern-day mules, as one method of smuggling drugs up here. Let's say, for example, a person agreed and said, yes, you're right, we really don't want the mafia selling, we don't want certain organized crime syndicates selling alcohol during Prohibition. We also don't want them selling drugs during drug prohibition. And isn't that in fact exactly the model we force upon ourselves with legal prohibition?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's nothing new under the sun. Prohibition's never worked anywhere. Of course, we had the great noble experiment from 1920 to 1933. What is absolutely amazing to me is it was a constitutional amendment, put it in effect, and it took a constitutional amendment which requires 3/4 of the states and 2/3 of the senators and congressmen to repeal it. And we repealed it in 13 years because it was an incredibly stupid idea. And now we're putting up with this for 45 years so far, $1.5 trillion, and the results are not there.
Have you ever?
Well, you can quote Einstein. One of the favorite quotes is Einstein's doing something over and over and over, expecting different results is insanity. So,
I love pointing out to people that while Richard Nixon gave us the expression 4 more years, which sadly and inexplicably worked for him to get reelected, what I think of is if I said to you as a former law enforcement officer, former Leo, and I love that term, I'm sorry, it's so good. If we asked you as a former Leo, if we gave you 4 more years, military hardware, Black Hawk helicopters, RPGs, you tell me what you want. AWACS, you tell NSA computers will share all the stolen data, which we know they really do. If we gave you 4 more years, would prohibition work? Would we solve the problem and eliminate all dangerous or arguably dangerous drugs from our United States society?
Well, again, in my humble opinion, no. We can't keep them out of state prisons, much less this country. And if you look, why has the United States got such a problem when other countries like the Netherlands and Portugal, where it's been decriminalized, consume per capita consumption is 1/10 or 1/2 to 1/10 what we have here. So, the public health minister of the Netherlands was asked that question a couple years ago, and he replied, well, we made drugs non-glamorous. That's why people don't do it anymore. So they're glamorous because they're illegal. We reduced by 50% the usage of the most addictive drug we know of, which is nicotine, from 1983 to 2003. Didn't put anybody in jail, didn't raid anybody's homes, didn't shoot anybody. So, again, that's, we need to approach drug use with the same social emphasis.
Well, I want to put an emphasis here on the importance of paying our bills. We're going to take a quick break and then come back and pick up where we left off here at Time for Hemp.
are listening to the Time for Hemp Global Broadcasting Network. Please share us with your friends.
Yeah, stay alert with consciousness. See, that's the whole key. It's called like being aware that you're not the only person on the planet, so you've got to be responsible for what you do. You know, you get your medication at the pharmacy, and the side of the bottle it says, be careful when driving heavy equipment, you know, things like that. Well, that's true when you're using medical cannabis, or even having too much chocolate will give you a nap attack. And if you're driving, I don't want you falling asleep. Be responsible in everything you do, and just realize that there are people around you. And unless you're sitting at home in the privacy of your own environment, be respectful of the needs, freedoms, and rights of those around you. And golly gee, if we did that, we wouldn't need to have all these silly nanny state laws. With that said, I pass this joint conversation back to my joint host here at Time for Hemp.
As I am so fond of saying, Casper and Richard, we're just smoking them today. We're just smoking them.
We are, but we've only got about 6 minutes left to wrap it up, so I'll let you guys get down to your conclusions. And
Richard, where do you think things are headed? Do we keep on our current track? Are we headed in the right direction?
Well, I think the next election there'll be more states that have at least marijuana legalized. I don't know if I mentioned this. The University of Texas at Houston. I think also they were joined by maybe Rice. But anyway, I saw a public opinion survey that even here in a conservative state like Texas, 77%, which is, 3/4 of the people at least want medical marijuana reform laws passed here in Texas. And over 55% of the total population of Texas wants to see recreational marijuana laws passed here as well. So the other thing, when you look at the demographics, the people who are against legalizing drugs are our age, old white guys. We're dying off. The younger people, this is a non-issue with them. It's going to happen. So, and again, people don't look at history. I mean, marijuana has only been illegal federally since 1937. My father was 10 years old when that law passed. That's not that long ago. So, yes, I think we're heading in the right direction. I wish there was a way we could speed it up. But, we'll see the next election. We'll see what happens.
One of the ironies...
I personally like Gary Johnson. So,
One of the ironies that strikes me repeatedly is just how much of a Republican core value issue legalizing and regulating really is. Fiscal responsibility, independent thinking, self-responsibility, states' rights, small government, the state not interfering with personal decisions. All the things Republicans historically have stood for that form the basis of their perspective, right down the line are the very items that suggest legalization and regulation as our avenue towards success. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Although, again, this is an issue that cuts across both party lines, for sure. Because you got people like liberals like Bill Maher who use it and make no secret of it. But you also have conservatives, Buckley, William F. Buckley, and other very, very conservative people saying the same thing. So I'm just hoping that whoever gets elected, honestly, I'm very disappointed in the present occupant because he certainly did it, and he says he did it, but he dismisses the idea of legalization.
You're referring to President Obama?
Yeah. I mean, Bush did it. He just says he didn't do it. But Obama, for sure, he says in his books he did it. And then when people ask him about, if he'd have been caught, there's no way he'd be president today. Hell, there's no way he'd have been in even a state assembly or an attorney. I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe if you have a felony conviction, you cannot be a member of the bar.
The short answer is it's not black and white. It certainly is a problem. It's not as black and white as you might think.
Anyway, yes, I think we're going in the right direction. I would like to see it go faster because we're still wasting an awful lot of money and an awful lot of resources that could be diverted to other more useful things.
Well, I have to disagree. Here's why. I think we do not need any extra money diverted to anything else. I think our education system is perfect. I think throwing more money at education is an absolute waste of money. We don't need it. I think everyone is well nourished, so I don't think throwing any money at nourishment or that type of education is worthwhile. And I cannot think of anything that will help our society, our civilians.
Let's go to Mars. We went to the moon in '69 when I was in high school. Let's go to Mars.
I like that.
Because all the spin-offs from that program will allow us to walk around with telephones in our hand.
Isn't that the truth? And I hope my sarcasm isn't lost. But our prioritizing...
But anyway.
Well, we are down to the last couple of minutes, gentlemen, so this would be a groovy time to give a shout-out to our favorite URLs or organizations that we want to put a spotlight on. Let's start with our joint guest, Richard.
Yes.
You want to put a spotlight?
Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. Go to the webpage, read what we have to say, and if you agree with us, write your congressmen or your state legislatures, and if you don't agree with us, keep your mind open to the arguments.
Right on. Well said.
As we used to say, if you're not ready to agree with it, put it on a shelf in your brain so it's there if and when you need it. Lenny Frieling here, and I would like to give a shout out to, as I always do, teamwork. We can't do this alone. Normal can't do it alone. I suspect LEAP can't do it alone. That's LEAP, LEAP.cc. We have Drug Policy Alliance, Students for Sensible Drug Policy, Marijuana Policy Project, International Conference on Drug Policy Reform every 2 years. This is happening. This is happening everywhere. It is happening from different perspectives. We need to keep working cooperatively as a team, each with our individual focuses, but at the end of the day, together we win. Thanks, Casper.
Absolutely, and do remember, we are no longer just a 1-hour show, but we are 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We are a team of people who are working diligently to end prohibition by bringing you new content that you can share with your friends all around the world. And don't forget, the next time you hear me, you'll know that it's time for hemp.
The money that they spend. Take another look and spend some time for him. Don't cut trees for paper, cause it hurts the environment. Stop deforestation, yes, it's time for him. Whoa, an acre of hemp makes 20 bales of oil. No need for pesticides to poison all our soil. People got no food, they got no clothes, they got no rent. Well, time for hemp! Yeah!
Free? Did you say free? Free hemp? Free hemp? Free hemp video and audio? Free downloads of all the top artists, all the pot artists on planet Earth. Interviews with all the people making the movement, making the hemp movement. It's time for hemp. That's right, world. It's time for hemp. That's right, world. It's time for hemp.